The smoke had already gone cold by the time Eli Mercer found what was left of the town. Ash still drifted through the valley like slow snow, clinging to fence posts, to burnt wagon wheels, to the skeletons of homes that would never rise again. He stopped his horse at the ridge, pulled off his hat, and bowed his head. There had been 12 families here last spring. He remembered their laughter at the trading post, the smell of bread baking, the sound of a fiddle at dusk. Now there was nothing but wind and ruin. He told himself he should keep riding. The road west waited, and with it, a promise he'd made to himself never to linger where ghosts still whispered. But then his horse shifted beneath him, ears twitching toward a sound Eli almost missed. A cough. Faint, human, from the ruins below. He nudged the reins and started down slow, scanning the wreckage. His boots hit the ash-soaked ground. The air smelled like wet cinders and sorrow. Another cough, this one sharper, closer. He followed it to the blackened remains of the old chapel. Half the roof was gone. The bell lay cracked in the grass, and inside, under what used to be the pulpit, he saw her. A woman, curled tight beside a child no older than 5. The boy didn't move. Her arms still wrapped him, shielding him from fire that had taken everything else. Eli froze. Then he saw the rise of her chest, shallow but there. He dropped to his knees, brushing away ash with trembling hands. "Ma'am?" His voice caught on the word. She flinched at the sound, tried to sit up, failed. Her eyes opened, smoke gray, hollow from heat and grief. She didn't speak, just stared at him like she couldn't decide if he was real. Eli slid his arms under her shoulders, feeling how light she was, all bone and burned fabric. When he lifted her, something fell from her grasp. The boy's small hand, lifeless, slipping free. Eli's breath broke. "Lord!" He carried her out of the chapel into the cold daylight. She didn't cry, didn't make a sound as she turned her face away from the smoldering ruin that had been her world. He wrapped her in his coat, felt her tremble once, twice, and then go still. He buried the child before dusk. She sat in the grass, silent, hands folded around a charred scrap of fabric. When the hole was filled and the last stone placed, Eli stood beside her. "You got kin left?" he asked softly. She shook her head once. He wanted to ask her name, but it felt cruel to make her speak. The road west was long, the nights colder now. He couldn't leave her here. He'd buried enough ghosts of his own to know how loneliness could kill faster than hunger. He built a small fire near the stream that cut through the valley's edge. She sat wrapped in his coat, staring at the flames like she was waiting for them to turn her to ash too. He poured coffee into a tin cup, held it out. She didn't take it. "My name's Eli Mercer," he said quietly. "Used to be a carpenter. Headed toward Clearwater Ridge. Heard there's work building barns before winter." No response. "Just the fire popping. You're welcome to ride with me that far. Safer than staying in a place that's already dead." After a long silence, she reached out and took the cup. Her hand shook so bad he had to steady it with his own. She drank once, twice, then whispered, voice raw as the wind. "Nora." Eli nodded. "All right, Nora." That night, she didn't sleep. He could tell by the way her shoulders tensed every time the fire hissed. He stayed awake too, pretending to whittle a stick while his mind turned to his own ghosts. The mine explosion. The 14 men buried alive because of a beam he'd built too thin to save on nails. He'd carried their names for 4 winters. Every time he looked at his hands, he saw the weight of what he'd done. By dawn, the valley was pale and still. He saddled the horse and packed the gear. When he turned, she was standing by the grave, hair tangled, eyes dry. She touched the stone once, then walked toward him without a word. He helped her mount, careful of her burned hands. The horse snorted, uneasy, but didn't fight. They rode west. The first day passed in silence. She never looked back. The second day they stopped by a stream to rest. Eli caught 2 fish with his line, cleaned them, roasted them over coals. When he handed her a piece, she said, barely above a whisper, "He was my son, Thomas." Eli didn't know what to say. He looked like a strong boy. She nodded once, staring at the fire. "He was, till the fever came." I thought he'd burn it out. Then the fire took the house. Her voice cracked. She pressed a hand to her mouth. He looked away, giving her space to grieve in private. The mountains loomed ahead, gray against the fading light. You don't have to tell it, he said softly. But she did. In the quiet that followed, she told him everything. The cough that started on a Tuesday, the storm that kept them inside, the lightning that found the roof, the neighbors who never came. He listened, hands folded, heart breaking for a stranger he'd met in the ashes. That night, she finally slept. When he woke before dawn, the frost was thick on the grass, the sky still black. He built up the fire, watched her sleep with the kind of stillness that only comes after too much pain. He thought about leaving then, about slipping away before the road turned them into something they couldn't name. But when she stirred and murmured the boy's name in her sleep, he knew he couldn't go. By noon, they reached the ridgeline. From there, the plains stretched wide, endless, golden under the sun. The wind smelled clean, like rain that hadn't fallen yet. Eli pointed toward a small cluster of cottonwoods. There's a cabin down that way. Old Trapper used to live there. Might be empty. It wasn't. An old woman opened the door before they reached it. Her face was lined deep, eyes sharp as flint. You lost? She asked. Eli tipped his hat. Just looking for shelter. Cold night's coming. The woman studied Nora, then stepped aside. Fire's lit. You can share it till morning. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine resin and bread. The old woman introduced herself as Hattie Boone. Been keeping this place since my husband passed. Ain't much, but it's warm. Nora stood by the hearth, hands outstretched to the flame. For the first time since the ruins, her shoulders dropped. Hattie noticed the burns on her palms and clucked her tongue. You poor child. Sit. Let me fix you up proper. Nora started to protest, but Hattie had the kind of authority only frontier widows carried. Eli stepped back, letting the two women talk. It felt right, like some invisible thread pulling them both toward something healing. Later, over stew, Hattie asked what brought them through the valley. Eli said work. Nora said nothing. Hattie nodded knowingly. Work's a fine reason to keep breathing. So's kindness. One leads to the other more often than not. That night, after Nora slept in Hattie's spare bed, Eli sat outside under the stars, hat on his knee. The fire inside cast a glow through the cabin window. He thought of the town burned to nothing, of the child he buried, of the woman sleeping under a stranger's roof, and of the road ahead. Maybe this was his penance, to keep her safe till she could stand again. By morning, frost dusted the ground like sugar. Hattie pressed a small cloth bundle into Nora's hands. Salve, herbs, a clean bandage. For the burns, she said, and a little bread for the road. You ride careful. Nora hugged her, whispered thanks. Eli saddled the horse. When she climbed up behind him, she hesitated. You don't have to take me farther, she said. You've done enough. He looked over his shoulder. Not sure kindness works like that. They rode on. By the second week, Nora could ride alone. Her strength returned slow but steady. She spoke more. About the town, about the lessons she used to teach children before the fire. Letters and numbers, she said once, voice soft. And stories when there was time. You a teacher? Eli asked. Was. He smiled faintly. Maybe we'll be again? The road took them through open plains, past herds of elk and rivers swollen with spring melt. Every night they built a small fire, cooked what they caught, and talked less about the past, more about where the trail might end. Once, when they crossed a narrow bridge, the horse slipped, nearly throwing them both. Eli caught the reins, muscles burning, and steadied the animal. Nora clung to him, trembling. When it was over, she didn't let go right away. Neither did he. Later that night, she said quietly, I thought maybe God was done sending help. Eli stared into the fire. Maybe he just takes the long road getting there. She smiled for the first time. It changed her face, made her look almost alive again. Days turned to weeks. The land grew greener, rivers calmer. They passed a small settlement at Clearwater Ridge, where Eli took a job repairing fences for a rancher. He built her a small shelter near the creek, nothing fancy, just enough to keep out rain. She said she'd stay until she decided where to go next. But she never said where that might be. One evening, while Eli fixed a broken post, he saw Nora by the creek, washing her burned hands in the cold water. The sun caught her hair, turning it copper. She looked like someone pulled halfway between worlds, one of ash, one of light. He found himself walking toward her without thinking. She looked up, startled. "You should rest," she said. "Can't seem to when there's work left." "Always work left," she murmured. "That's what keeps us breathing." He knelt beside her, rinsing the dirt from his own hands. The water ran brown, then clear. "You ever think about staying?" he asked. She looked at the sky. "Staying where?" "Here." Her expression softened, then shuddered again. "This place ain't mine." "Maybe it doesn't have to be," he said. "Maybe it just needs you." She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on him a moment longer before she turned back to the water. That night, when the fire burned low, she said his name for the first time. "Eli." He looked up. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not asking me to be whole before I'm ready." He nodded, unable to speak. The wind carried the scent of rain and pine. It was the first night he slept without dreaming of the mine. When morning came, he woke to the sound of her singing softly by the creek, a tune so fragile it seemed the world might break if he breathed too loud. He sat up slowly, heart full of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe, or mercy finding its way back through the cracks. He didn't know yet that before the week was out, the past would come riding down that same road. One man, one gun, and a choice that would test everything he thought redemption meant. And that's where the story would shift. From the kindness that saves, to the courage it takes to keep saving. 3 days later, the wind changed. Eli felt it first, the way men who've lived too long in silence feel danger before it speaks. The morning was clear, the river calm, but the air carried dust, the kind kicked up by hooves far off. He paused his hammer mid-swing, listening. The sound came again, faint, steady, wrong. He looked toward the ridge. A rider. By the time the figure reached the clearing, Nora was by the creek, washing linen. She turned at the noise, eyes narrowing. Eli stepped in front of her without thinking. The rider slowed, dismounted, and removed his hat. He was young, maybe 30, but his face held the kind of weariness that didn't come from age. "Looking for a woman," he said. "Name's Nora Keller." Nora froze. The wind died. Eli felt her breath hitch behind him. "Why?" he asked. The man's gaze flicked toward her, then back. "She's my wife." The words hit harder than any bullet. Nora stepped forward, slow, deliberate. "You're lying." The man smiled, thin and cruel. "You left me, remember? Took the boy. Told folks I was the monster. Truth is, I just ran out of patience waiting for you to love me." Eli's fists clenched. "You left her to die in that fire?" The man shrugged. "Wasn't my fire. Was the Lord's. Maybe he decided she needed humbling." Nora's voice trembled. "You knew the house burned." He looked at her like she was something he'd already buried. "I knew. Figured it'd save me the trouble of coming back." Eli stepped forward. "You best turn that horse around." The man's hand dropped to his belt. "Or what?" Eli didn't reach for his gun. He just stared. "Or you find out mercy's harder to come by than bullets." The silence stretched tight. Then the man laughed, a low, ugly sound, and swung himself back into the saddle. "You'll regret crossing me, Carpenter." When he rode off, the dust trailed long behind him. Nora sank to her knees by the creek, shaking. Eli knelt beside her. "You all right?" She nodded once, but tears slipped through the nod. "He used to say I made him small. That's why he drank. Why he hit. Said if I'd been softer, he wouldn't have to be cruel." Eli's jaw tightened. "Cruelty's a choice, not a sickness." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "He'll come back." "I know," Eli said quietly, "and when he does, we'll be ready." They fortified the cabin that night, Stacked logs, fixed hinges, moved the horses to the lower grove. The air felt heavy, waiting. Nora sat by the fire, her hands raw from work. Eli watched her in the flicker of light, thinking she looked stronger now than any woman he'd known. Broken maybe, but built from pieces that refused to stay shattered. "Why'd you save me?" she asked suddenly. He looked up. "I was just another stranger in the ashes. You could have ridden past." He thought about the mine, the men whose faces he still saw when he closed his eyes. "Because once, someone should have saved me, and didn't." She studied him for a long moment, then reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "Maybe this is how we both get right with what we've done." Outside, thunder rumbled far off. By morning, the storm came. Rain hammered the roof, lightning split the sky. Eli worked through it, repairing the fence line, refusing to think about what rode behind that curtain of weather. It was near dusk when he saw the horse tracks in the mud. Fresh, leading toward the creek. He ran. Nora was there, standing in the open, her shawl whipping in the wind. Across the water, the rider waited. The same man, soaked, eyes wild. "Told you I'd come back," he shouted. "You think you can hide behind a stranger? You belong to me." Nora's hands didn't tremble. "I don't belong to anyone." He raised his gun. Eli burst from the trees before the shot fired, slamming into him, both men crashing into the mud. The gun went off, grazing Eli's arm. The two struggled, rain turning the ground to slick clay. The man swung wild, shouting curses swallowed by thunder. Eli caught his wrist, forced the gun away, but the man drove a knee into his ribs and rolled free. The next shot tore through the air, missing Nora by inches. Eli lunged, grabbing the barrel, twisting. The gun flew into the river. They grappled, mud and blood mixing, the storm roaring above. The man's hand found a rock. He swung. Eli saw it coming too late. The world flashed white. When the blur cleared, Eli was on his back, breath gone. The man stood over him, rock raised again. Then Nora screamed, not in fear, but fury. She swung the heavy branch she'd grabbed from the fire pit. It hit the man's shoulder hard enough to crack bone. He dropped the rock, staggered. She hit him again, and again. When he fell, she stood over him, chest heaving, rain streaking her face like tears that wouldn't stop. Eli pushed himself up, dizzy. "Nora!" She dropped the branch, stumbled backward, shaking. "I didn't mean—" Eli caught her before she fell. "You meant to live," he said. "That's all?" The man groaned, blood mixing with rain. Eli dragged him toward his horse, tied his hands with the rope, and shoved him onto the saddle. "Ride east," he said through clenched teeth. "You show your face here again, I'll finish what she started." The man spat blood, but the look in his eyes was broken now, the kind that knows it's beaten. He kicked the horse and vanished into the storm. When it was over, Eli and Nora stood by the river, soaked, shaking, alive. She looked at her hands like she didn't recognize them. "I thought mercy was supposed to be easy." "It never is," he said. "But you showed it. You let him go." Her voice cracked. "I didn't do it for him." "I know." They walked back to the cabin in silence. He cleaned the cut on his arm. She changed into dry clothes. When he lit the lamp, the light fell on her face. Not soft, but certain. Something in her had shifted. That night she sat beside him on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. The rain eased, stars breaking through. "Do you believe people can start over?" she asked. Eli stared at the horizon. "I believe they have to. Otherwise, all the pain's for nothing." She nodded. "Then maybe it's time I start." From that day forward, they built something new. Eli finished the cabin, added a porch, carved a cradle from leftover cedar. Nora planted herbs by the creek, taught the children from nearby farms how to read, their laughter filling the meadow each afternoon. The valley that once echoed with storms grew quiet again. Sometimes Eli would catch her humming by the fire, sunlight in her hair, and he'd think about that first night. Ash in the wind, despair in her eyes, and wonder if the same God who took so much could really give this back. Spring turned to summer. The grass grew tall, the fields green. Mercy, he realized, wasn't about saving strangers. It was about staying when the saving was done. One evening he found her by the grave she'd built for her son, a small cross by the river's bend. She knelt there, placing wildflowers in the dirt. When she stood, her hand slipped into his. "Do you still hear them?" she asked. "The men from the mine?" He hesitated. "Not as often." "Then maybe they're resting. Maybe they know you made it mean something." He swallowed hard. "And you? Do you see the fire when you close your eyes?" She looked at the water, calm and gold in the fading sun. "No, just the river." They stood there a long while, watching the current move. Somewhere upstream, thunder rolled, distant now, harmless. When night came, the cabin glowed warm against the dark. She cooked stew. He fixed a broken chair leg. Worn routines, quiet grace. At the table she smiled, a real smile this time. "You ever think we were meant to find each other?" Eli met her gaze. "If Mercy's got a map, I reckon it leads folks right where they need to go." She reached across, took his hand. "Then I'm home." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Yeah, you are." Years later, travelers passing through Clearwater Ridge would see a light burning steady in a cabin by the river. The schoolhouse across the field, the sound of laughter carrying on the wind. They'd say a woman lived there who taught children and healed hearts, and a man who built everything with his hands because once Mercy had built him back. And when the storms came down the valley, as they always did, that lamp never went out. It burned through the night, a promise made, a promise kept, that even from ashes, kindness could build a home again.